Hi there. So you have your individualised feedback on your first assignment for this course, but we thought it might be useful to share some overview feedback. And given that it's the break, the easiest way to do that is in a hopefully relatively quick video. So this should give you the opportunity to contextualise the feedback and to see and share with us some of the patterns that we've seen. I guess it would be better expressed as we can share with you some of the patterns that we've seen, which ultimately will help you do better again, because overall we were very happy with the results in your next assignment. So firstly, let me point out that there were a large number of different deals. Now, more than 40% of you looked at the ANZ Suncorp deal, and there was a little over 10% looking at Chemist Warehouse. Excuse the typo on the slide there. But basically, overall, we saw a large number of different deals, and that's really heartening. It shows us that you're going out, you're doing your own research, that you are finding things that are interesting to you, and as a consequence, we got to learn about a range of industries and a range of different issues. As I mentioned, more than 40% were interested in ANZ Suncorp, and then basically this slide sets out all of the deals that were covered. The ones in blue, we only had one paper on each of those, so it was very much skewed. A lot of deals on two companies, or a lot of papers on two different deals, I should say, and the rest, it was a very long tail. Overall, we're really happy with the results. So this is the grading curve. Slightly more than 10% received high distinctions, which I think is really excellent. It's quite rare to see that many high distinctions. And also a significant proportion here as distinctions as well. Even at the credit level, you'll see that a number of those will actually flip in, so technically be credits, but ultimately right at the top end of that credit will flip into being distinctions overall. So we're really, really super happy with that. And in some levels, it's not surprising though. This is an elective, so presumably you've chosen it because you are interested in it. Many of you are in your third year. You get what studying law is about now. You're organised, you're efficient, and you write well. At the same time, this is possibly a trickier assignment than many of you thought it would be. These results are before adjustments for late submissions. And unfortunately, there were a number of late submissions, and with essentially 2 marks a day, or 2 overall percentage points for your overall mark, because this is worth 20% all up. While ultimately there's plenty of time for you to catch up there, it just seems like a bit of a waste. So again, being organised, making sure that you are ready to submit on time makes sense. The only fail, and I love it when this happens, the only fail was a non-submission. So everybody who submitted achieved a pass, which again is not always the case. And the proportions of passes is actually identical to the proportion of high distinctions, which is really interesting. And again, I'd like to see more people in the credit than the passes, which is clearly happening, but I like to eliminate those passes altogether, quite frankly. But at the end of the day, a pass demonstrates that you can do it, that you are doing it, and certainly plenty of opportunity to improve your grade across the rest of this semester. So we saw a couple of patterns. The best papers had at least these 4 things in common. They followed the instructions. I know, this is one of the really frustrating things for me, is when papers don't follow the instructions, and then we end up with grades that really don't reflect the intelligence and the effort, but we can't grade you for things that we don't see, where you don't address an element of the paper. So again, the best papers explicitly followed the instructions. It made it easy for the graders to find what they were looking for. They clearly used the rubrics wisely. The other thing is that high distinctions and distinctions incorporated their own clear analysis. They didn't just repeat what others had said about the deal. They incorporated a really strong narrative in relation to the methodology. So we rewarded highly when you identified not only what you looked at and the pros and cons, that would get you a credit, but you identified and evaluated what the research process was and how it was valuable to the exercise. Now, this is really important because the next two assignments will be more traditional problem-based solving, write a memorandum of advice in relation to a particular problem sort of exercise, but we expect you to, and you will be rewarded highly for good research. And good research is more than just finding a case. It's finding the right case or the right regulation or the right legislation and giving priority to the primary sources and knowing where to find and where to look for similar deals that you can use by analogy. And this exercise, this first assignment, should have set you up really well to do a good job of that. The other thing that really stood out in the best papers, the high distinctions, was that they found something interesting, demonstrated insight, provided us with their personal touch that demonstrated to us that they had thought about the deal and gone beyond public statements in relation to the deal. Probably one of the most regular comments that we were making was something along the lines of, you need to go deeper here. So when it came to papers requiring improvement, often that was the advice that we gave. And so this can be really difficult because you need to demonstrate that you've identified all of the issues, but by prioritizing the most important issues and going deep on those, rather than try to do a little bit of everything, ultimately you are likely to get better marks. And now, particularly when it comes to the next assignment where you are answering a question, the more relevant an issue is to getting the answer right, the more priority you should give to it. Another thing that we saw a lot, and this kind of ties in with not following instructions or guidance, is it could be, in many cases, it was very difficult to find the discussion of the research method, and many just didn't follow instructions. So you were asked to look at 2 of each type of research tool, and a number of you just didn't do that. So that made it very hard for us to reward you when you're not actually following the instructions. Probably the one that worries me more, although not following instructions, is, look, that's rushing, running out of time, thinking you know what you're doing. That's an attention to detail problem. The one that probably worries me more from a going forward, looking at the law and being a good lawyer position, is a failure to really critically analyse the text, taking as gospel what the company's PR statements say about the deal, about the issues, about who's right and wrong. So some of the best papers looked at, particularly with the ANZ Suncorp, and given there were so many of those, looked at how ultimately the court overturned the ACCC's decision. And they looked critically at that, looked at understanding the reasons for that, and really provided their own analysis and their own insight in relation to that part of the process. Now, that one's easy to mention because there were so many of them, but with similar things in other deals, when you're recognising where a regulator says one thing, but you're contemplating what the alternatives could be, or where you agree with the regulator, or you thought that the regulator might have had more opportunity to exercise powers. The other thing that we saw here, which is kind of related in some ways to not critically examining the text, was a high reliance on secondary sources, particularly the regulators and particularly the ACCC websites. And so essentially the way I think about it is the closer that a statement is to a fact, and a fact includes what the law says, what the regulations say, then the more important it is to go to a primary source, the actual regulation, the actual legislation, or cases from which the law evolves. Now, clearly, then the secondary sources are really helpful, especially the regulators' websites. But just because the regulator says that this is how the law works doesn't mean that the law is going to work that way. And those of you who did the ANZ Suncorp decision will have seen that. I mean, ultimately, the ACCC's determinations were overturned. So again, your job is to go deep and to try and find the primary sources. And so think about these things. Hopefully this is a useful list when you go to the next assignment. Now I'm going to shoot through the next couple here. In relation to the next few slides are basically an overview of what the rubric said in relation to a requirement and then how we saw people do. So when it came to identification or summary of the deal, overall most people did very well on this. This was kind of a hard one to shine at. Only a very small percentage got an HD in this requirement. But really at the credit and pass level, particularly the pass level, we were seeing people like missing key terms, for example, the price, and really not being able to summarize the deal in a clear way, or not really telling us what this paper was going to be about and where it was going. So lacking in signposting or sort of a clear purpose statement. The evaluation of the research resources. Now, this too was a really important part. It was worth 4 points overall. And this, we saw the beginnings of some people not really being able to distinguish between the statements that are made by the company and PR statements and research that has gone to some depth. So more insight, more own analysis, that's what made the difference between good and excellent in this space. But as you can see, by far the largest proportion of you receive credits in this area. So clearly you can do it, you are doing it, and there's a little bit of work to be done. Greatest challenge that we had here was people explaining their research methodology. It was only worth 3 points, this section, but it really, a number of people just missed it. And you'll see this in the high number of not yets. So technically failing in this requirement, but we could at least find that an attempt had been made. So basically many papers just didn't explicitly address the methodologies and graders had to hunt it down. Some people just didn't do it at all, and there are a couple of fails in this area as well, but like outright fails, just no attempt. But this is probably the area where the most amount of work needed to be done. Now, this is not an explicit criteria on the next assignment, but actually being clear on what you're looking at and why is a key element of getting the research right. The analysis of the regulatory framework was the next section. And to get a credit here, all you had to do was really clearly identify the regulatory bodies and explain their roles. And really you were rewarded more highly for more insight and more detail and being able to really prioritize what mattered. We did see most people did this at least at the credit standard. We did see there was a lot of focus on the ACCC though overall, and many papers didn't really consider ASX or ASIC in particular in sufficient detail to demonstrate that they understood how the package of these regulators or quasi-regulators fit together. So again, if that was you, take a look at the comments on your paper and really think about this as you are prioritizing when you're doing the next assignment. The discussion of the legal issues. Now, unsurprisingly, this is something where it was hard for you all to shine because all of you are very good at this part. For the most part, it was done very well. There were some that we really didn't see a lot of distinction between legal issues and deal processes. So the fact that you have to do something, report something, file something isn't necessarily an issue. It's a step in the process. Failure to do it might result in an issue, but if there was no failure, really identifying and prioritizing which of the issues matter here. And again, unsurprisingly, your writing and communication skills are mostly very strong. There are a couple of people who really need to have a look at this. And if you were kind of a pass or not yet in this space or even a fail, it's going to be really important that you have a look at the reasons for that. And if you need help with your writing, there are a number of resources that you can look at. Now, clearly, in a strong field, it's hard to distinguish yourself, to stand out. And so that's why our distinctions and high distinctions are kind of lower in this space. There's also a disappointingly high number of AI breaches in this space, or potential AI breaches, I should say, and unfortunately there are a few people that I am going to have to refer off to investigation. And often that comes up in the way that this is written. It comes up in a lack of proper citations. It comes up in using language that appears to be inconsistent. But it also comes up here, so not so much the AI breach, but some of the stuff that we were seeing, things like plural singular confusions, because you are tracking so much material that is long quotes, ending up with tense changes that are all over the place. Some people very heavy on quotations. Now, they're not necessarily academic breaches because they're properly quoted and formatted. Although I must admit, for long formatting, I wasn't seeing a lot of proper AGLC4 styling. But that probably matters less than actually the more long quotes you have, the less there is of your own presentation. And so that makes it more difficult. So final slide, or before a question slide anyway. What does this all mean for your next assignment? What's done is done. Let's look at what you need to think about next time around. Firstly, read the question in the assignment brief carefully. Secondly, allow yourself enough time. The overall marks are going to be pushed back just because of late submissions, which is very disappointing. Assignments always take longer than you think they're going to. And if they don't and you end early, actually those other things that can go wrong between the time you start and otherwise finish, you've got more time for those things to happen. Remember too, this second assignment, you're going to be doing it in Cadmus. Some of you haven't used Cadmus before, and so there might be a little bit of a learning curve there. Having said that, the hints and tips that it'll give you about referencing, I think that will be helpful to you. And also, it just will make the formatting, you don't have to worry as much about formatting. It's a really simple formatting engine. And of course, we're much less risk of documents being corrupted or problems with upload, etc. Use Cadmus to take your notes about the problem and about the question that you've been given, but really don't start writing properly. Don't even structure properly until you've got a clear understanding of the answer you're going to give, especially if you are at risk of just not wanting to delete work that you have done. It's going to be really important to actually think about the question, identify the issues. For each of the issues, identify the rules that apply to those issues, and then think about what that actually means and prioritize what's most important so that you can give some advice in clear and appropriate language. So think about this as a strategic exercise. If it's on the rubric, then you need to deal with it, and you want to deal with it explicitly in a way that your grader is not hunting for it. So making sure that once you've got your answer just generally in your head, that you're going back and checking against that rubric to make sure that you've covered everything off. There's value in being explicit here. Also, use a range of sources and use the right source for the job. Don't tell me that the ACCC say that their powers are X, Y, and Z. Actually tell me what the relevant law says. So what the competition and consumer law says that the ACCC's powers are in relation to this. Similarly with ASIC and ASX, looking at the actual ASX rules, looking at what the Corporations Act says about ASIC's powers and the powers that it has delegated to ASX, for example. If that's relevant. Now, actually, your second assignment, ASX, is probably not going to be relevant, but hey, that's not for me to decide. That's for you to decide when you had a look. Okay, as always, questions, concerns, frustrations, compliments, suggestions, anything that you want to talk to me about, please feel free to either contact me directly or, of course, raise it in a tutorial with Justin. Cheers!